My beloved child, someone in your soulmate's family recently came across a forgotten picture of you, and what happened next was so emotional that even they struggled to understand why. They were crying. It wasn't simply because they recognized your face. It was because that picture brought back a memory your soulmate had tried very hard to keep hidden. And when their mother finally understood who was standing in that old photograph, she became completely silent. Don't skip this, because the picture was connected to a moment your soulmate thought nobody else remembered. Stay until the end, because something huge is waiting to be uncovered in this story, and the most important part is not what she saw in the picture, it's what your soulmate once said about you when they believed no one was listening. Imagine a quiet room late in the evening. The kind of room where everything feels ordinary until one small detail suddenly changes the entire atmosphere. She was looking through an old collection of photographs, perhaps searching for something completely unrelated, when she found one picture tucked away where it had been forgotten. It wasn't displayed. It wasn't framed. It wasn't sitting somewhere obvious. It had been placed between other memories. Almost as if someone had intentionally tried to make sure it wouldn't be found. She picked it up. Casually at first. Then she looked closer. And her expression changed. There you were. Maybe it was a picture from a time when you and your soulmate were still close. Maybe it was a simple photograph that meant nothing to anyone else. Perhaps you were smiling without even realizing that someone was capturing the moment. But there was something about your expression that stopped her. She recognized something in your face that she had heard about before. Not your name. Not your story. Something deeper. A feeling. A memory. A person her child had once spoken about in a completely different way. She may have turned the picture over, wondering if there was a date written on the back. Maybe there was a small note. Maybe there was nothing at all. And somehow, that made it even more emotional. Because suddenly she had a question she could not ignore. Why had her child kept this picture? Why was it still there after everything that happened? And why had they never thrown it away? That question opened a door that had been closed for a long time. But that wasn't the part that changed everything. The real moment came when she remembered a conversation from the past. A conversation your soulmate probably thought she had forgotten. It may have happened during an ordinary evening, perhaps after an argument, after a difficult day, or during one of those quiet moments when people finally say what they have been holding inside. Your soulmate had mentioned you. Not casually. Not like someone talking about a person who no longer mattered. There had been hesitation in their voice. There had been something unfinished. And their mother remembered the exact feeling of that conversation. She remembered how her child looked away while talking about you. She Remembered the pause before your name was spoken. She remembered how quickly the subject was changed afterward. At the time, she may not have understood it. She may have assumed it was simply an old relationship, an old friendship, or a chapter that had already ended. But now, holding that forgotten photograph in her hands, the memory returned with a completely different meaning. She realized that perhaps your soulmate had never truly stopped caring. They had simply stopped talking about it. And there is a difference. Sometimes silence does not mean the feeling disappeared. Sometimes silence means someone doesn't know what to do with what they still feel. Think about that for a moment. Your soulmate may have moved forward on the outside. They may have continued with daily life. They may have laughed with friends, gone to work, made plans, answered messages, and acted as though everything was normal. But there can still be one person whose memory remains quietly attached to certain songs, certain places, certain dates, and certain photographs. And that forgotten picture may have been one of those things. Their mother looked at it again. This time, she wasn't simply seeing your face. She was seeing the person her child had once been when they were around you. She was remembering stories, small details, things that didn't seem important at the time. The way your soulmate used to talk differently when your name came up. The way they became defensive when someone questioned the connection. The way they once said, "It's complicated," instead of simply saying, "It's over." Those little details suddenly came together. And perhaps she whispered something to herself, something like, "So this is the person." Because now she understood that you weren't just a forgotten photograph. You were connected to a part of her child's heart that had never been completely explained. But then something even more unexpected happened. She noticed a second detail in the photograph. Maybe it was the location. Maybe it was the date. Maybe it was something your soulmate had been wearing. Something that connected the picture to a specific day she remembered very clearly. A day when her child had come home unusually quiet. A day when they had locked themselves away for hours. A day when they had refused to explain why they were upset. And suddenly, she remembered asking, "What happened?" And your soulmate had answered, "Nothing." But now, she wondered if it had actually been about you. That realization can hurt in a strange way. Not because the past can be changed, but because parents sometimes realize years later that their child was hurting right in front of them, and they simply didn't know what to say. She may have held the photograph against her chest for a moment. She may have wiped away a tear without even realizing she was crying. And then she asked herself the question that would stay with her long after she put the picture down. What happened between them? Because there was clearly a story she had never heard. And the more she thought about it, the more she remembered. She remembered your soulmate once mentioning a place where you both had been. She remembered hearing your name unexpectedly during a conversation. She remembered the strange sadness that sometimes appeared whenever your soulmate was asked about love. She remembered how they would quickly smile and say they were fine. But now she wondered whether fine had ever really meant fine. This is where the story becomes more personal. Because sometimes the people closest to us know there is a missing piece, but they don't know where it belongs. Your soulmate may have carried that missing piece quietly for a long time. Maybe they blamed timing. Maybe they blamed circumstances. Maybe they convinced themselves that distance was the reason. Maybe they believed that too much had happened and going back would only reopen old wounds. Or maybe they were afraid that if they reached out, you wouldn't feel the same way anymore. That fear can keep someone silent longer than anyone realizes. And there may have been another reason too. Your soulmate may have believed that they had lost the right to tell you how they really felt. Perhaps they made choices they regret. Perhaps they disappeared when they should have stayed. Perhaps they said something they didn't mean because they were scared. Perhaps they allowed pride to speak when their heart wanted to speak honestly. And now, years or months later, that old picture became a reminder of everything they never said. Their mother may have realized something that your soulmate had never openly admitted. The hardest part was not losing the connection. The hardest part was never knowing what might have happened if fear had not made the decisions. Stay with me, because this is where the forgotten picture reveals something even more emotional. When their mother looked at it again, she noticed that the photograph wasn't random. It had been saved. Not thrown away. Not deleted. Saved. Someone had deliberately kept it. And suddenly she understood that your soulmate had made a choice. Long ago without ever saying it out loud. They had kept one small piece of you close, even while pretending to move on. That doesn't automatically mean they are ready to return. It doesn't guarantee what will happen next. But it does reveal something human and deeply believable. Some memories are harder to release than people admit. And their mother was beginning to understand just how much this particular memory mattered. She may have picked up the phone and almost called your soulmate immediately. Maybe she wanted to ask, "Why didn't you tell me?" Maybe she wanted to say, "I found the picture." But she hesitated. Because mothers often know when a question could open something their child has spent years trying to keep closed. So instead, she waited. She looked at the photograph one more time. And then she noticed something that made her heart sink. There was something written on the back. A few words. Perhaps a date. Perhaps a short sentence. Perhaps a name. Whatever it was, it confirmed that the picture had a story. And suddenly, the tears came harder. Because she remembered that day. She remembered her child coming home afterward. She remembered the silence. She remembered the look in their eyes. And now she understood that you had been part of a moment that had changed them. But she still didn't know the whole truth. And neither did anyone else. Not yet. Then came the conversation that your soulmate probably never expected to have with their mother. She eventually asked about the picture. Maybe she placed it quietly on the table. Maybe she didn't accuse them of anything. She simply asked, "Who is this?" And there was a pause. A long one. The kind of pause that says more than 100 words. Your soulmate looked at the photograph. And for a moment, they didn't answer. Maybe they smiled sadly. Maybe they looked away. Maybe they simply said your name. But then their mother asked the question that changed the atmosphere completely. Do you still think about them? Your soulmate could have lied. They could have laughed. They could have changed the subject. But perhaps this time, they couldn't. Perhaps they finally admitted that some people don't disappear just because you stop talking about them. Perhaps they said that they had tried to forget. Perhaps they said they thought they were over it. But then came the sentence that made their mother cry again. Because your soulmate may have quietly admitted, "I never stopped wondering what would have happened if I had done things differently." That sentence carries a different kind of pain. It isn't a promise. It isn't a prediction. It is regret. And regret can stay hidden for a very long time. Their mother may have reached across the table and held their hand. Maybe she didn't know what advice to give. Maybe she simply said, "Then why did you let them go?" And your soulmate had no easy answer. Because sometimes people don't walk away because they don't care. Sometimes they walk away because they are afraid they won't be enough. Afraid they will be rejected. Afraid the other person has already moved on. Afraid that reaching out will only prove that the past cannot be repaired. But there was still one thing their mother had not yet discovered. The photograph had been forgotten by everyone except one person. And that person had apparently been keeping another memory connected to it all along. Something your soulmate had never shown anyone. Something that could explain why they became emotional whenever your name was mentioned. Something that could reveal what really happened on the day that picture was taken. And when their mother finally found that second piece of the story, she understood why the first photograph had brought her to tears. Don't leave now. Because the next part is not about the picture itself. It is about what happened immediately after it was taken, the conversation that followed, and the one decision your soulmate made that they may still think about today. And if this story is touching something personal in your heart, take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment with one word, remember. Not because anyone can promise what your future holds, but because sometimes putting a feeling into words is the first step toward understanding it. And now, as the photograph rests quietly between them, your soulmate's mother reaches for it again and turns it over one more time. This time, she sees something she had completely missed before. A message. A few handwritten words. And the moment she reads them, her expression changes. Because those words explain why your soulmate never threw the picture away, and why, even after all this time, they were still carrying a part of that day with them. And what those words said is where the real story begins. The words on the back of the photograph were not long, but they carried the weight of everything your soulmate had never been able to say out loud. Their mother stared at them for several seconds, reading them again because she could hardly believe what she was seeing. It was something simple, almost painfully simple. A date, followed by a sentence written in your soulmate's handwriting. And suddenly, the tears returned. Not because the words were dramatic, but because she finally understood the emotion behind them. The sentence said, "I wish I had been brave enough to say what I really felt." That was it. No long explanation. No promise. No dramatic declaration. Just one honest sentence written at a time when your soulmate believed nobody would ever see it. Their mother slowly lowered the picture onto the table. She realized she had been holding something that belonged to a moment her child had never truly recovered from. And now she had a choice. She could ask questions. Or she could leave the past alone. But a mother who has just discovered that her child has been carrying regret for so long may find it impossible to simply walk away. So she waited until later. That evening, when your soulmate came into the room, she placed the photograph in front of them without saying a word. Your soulmate froze. The first thing they did was look at the picture. The second thing they did was look at their mother. And in that single moment, they knew. She had found it. They had spent so much time believing that memory was safely hidden, but now it was sitting between them. Their mother asked quietly, "Why did you keep this?" There was no anger in her voice. That somehow made the question harder. Your soulmate could have taken the picture away. They could have said it was old and meaningless. But they didn't. Instead, they sat down. And for the first time, they began talking about you without trying to make the story sound smaller than it really was. They told her about the day the picture was taken. They told her about the conversation that happened afterward. They told her about the things they wanted to say but couldn't. And then they admitted something that had been difficult to accept. They had been scared. Not of you. Not of the connection. They were scared of what the connection meant. Because when someone matters deeply, the possibility of losing them can become terrifying. And sometimes fear makes people do the very thing they are trying to avoid. They create distance. They become cold. They stop communicating. They pretend they don't care. They convince themselves that walking away is easier than risking rejection. But later, when everything becomes quiet, they begin remembering the moments when they should have stayed. Their mother listened without interrupting. She learned that there had been a time when your soulmate almost reached out to you. They had written a message. They had looked at your name on their phone. They had typed several sentences. Then they deleted everything. Not because they didn't want to talk to you, but because they convinced themselves you probably didn't want to hear from them. And that moment became one of the regrets they carried. Their mother asked, "Why didn't you just ask?" Your soulmate looked down. Maybe they didn't have an answer. Maybe the truth was uncomfortable. They had assumed they knew what you were thinking without ever giving you the chance to tell them. That is how distance sometimes grows. One person waits. The other person waits. Both believe the other has moved on. And eventually, silence starts pretending to be an answer. But there was something else. Their mother noticed that your soulmate still remembered tiny details about you. Not just the obvious things. They remembered the little things. The way you reacted when you were nervous. The kind of smile you gave when you were trying not to laugh. The words you used when you were upset but didn't want anyone to know. The small habits most people forget. Their mother realized something then. You had not simply been someone from the past. You had become a memory with emotional weight. A memory attached to a version of her child that she had not seen in a long time. And that realization made her emotional all over again. She asked, "Do you still care about them?" This time, your soulmate didn't answer immediately. The silence lasted long enough to become an answer of its own. Finally, they said something that their mother would remember for years. "I don't know what I'm supposed to call it anymore." That sentence revealed more than a simple yes or no could have. Because sometimes feelings change shape. What once felt like excitement can become longing. What once felt like love can become regret. What once felt like hope can become a quiet question that never disappears. Your soulmate may not know what the future should look like. They may not even know whether reconnecting would be possible or healthy. But they know the memory still matters. And that is exactly why their mother became emotional. She wasn't crying because she believed some perfect ending was guaranteed. She was crying because she could see that her child had been carrying an unfinished story alone. Then she asked the question that made the room completely silent. If you could go back to that day, what would you change? Your soulmate stared at the photograph for a long time. And perhaps, for the first time, they allowed themselves to answer honestly. They said they would have stayed longer. They would have listened instead of becoming defensive. They would have admitted they were scared instead of pretending they were fine. They would have said the words they swallowed. They would have asked you what you wanted instead of making the decision for both of you. And then they said something unexpected. They said, "I thought I was protecting both of us." Their mother immediately understood that this was not just about losing someone. It was about a decision made with good intentions that still caused pain. Your soulmate had convinced themselves that distance was the responsible choice. Maybe circumstances were complicated. Maybe the timing was wrong. Maybe there were family expectations, personal struggles, misunderstandings, or fears that made everything feel impossible. But whatever the reason, the result was the same. Two people who once understood each other had become strangers carrying memories of the same moments. Their mother reached for their hand and said, "You can't change what happened. But you can stop lying to yourself about how it made you feel." Those words stayed in the room. Your soulmate looked at the photograph again. And then something happened that their mother had not expected. They asked her a question. "What would you do if you were me?" She paused. A mother may want to tell her child exactly what to do, but she knew this was not her decision. She said something much simpler. "I would stop wondering and start being honest." That sentence changed the direction of the conversation. Because honesty does not always mean rushing back into someone's life. Sometimes honesty means admitting what you feel. Sometimes it means apologizing. Sometimes it means accepting that someone has moved on. And sometimes it means finally giving another person the truth they deserved a long time ago. Your soulmate understood that. But they were still afraid. They asked, "What if they don't want to hear from me?" Their mother answered, "Then at least you will know you gave them a choice, instead of making the choice for them." That was the moment something shifted inside your soulmate. Not because everything suddenly became perfect, but because they realized that fear had been controlling their decisions for too long. And maybe that is the deeper meaning behind the forgotten picture. It wasn't proof of destiny. It wasn't a guarantee of reunion. It was evidence of a human being who had never completely made peace with a decision from the past. But there was still one unanswered question. Why had the picture been hidden in that particular place? Their mother looked at the back again. The date was familiar. Your soulmate noticed her looking at it and became visibly uncomfortable. She asked, "What happened on this date?" Your soulmate didn't answer. She asked again. Still nothing. Then finally, they told her. That day had been the last time they saw you before everything changed. And what happened during those final minutes was something they had never told anyone. There had been one sentence you said that they remembered perfectly. A sentence that sounded ordinary at the time. But after you left, it stayed in their mind. They had replayed it again and again. They wondered whether it had been your way of saying goodbye. They wondered whether you had been waiting for them to stop you. And they wondered whether they had failed to understand what you were really trying to say. Their mother listened carefully. Then she asked, "What did they say?" "Your soulmate looked at the photograph and whispered the words." Their mother immediately began to cry. Again. Because those words revealed something neither of them had understood back then. You had not walked away because you stopped caring. You had walked away because you believed your soulmate had already made their decision. And your soulmate had walked away, believing the exact same thing about you. Two people had been protecting themselves from rejection at the same time. Both had been waiting for the other to make the first move. Both had misunderstood silence. And both had carried the consequences. But the story still had one final piece. Their mother suddenly remembered something from that same day. She remembered your soulmate coming home and saying something she had never forgotten. At the time, she thought it was just a frustrated comment. Now she realized it was a confession disguised as anger. She looked at your soulmate and said, "You told me that day that you had lost the person you were supposed to fight for." Your soulmate closed their eyes. They remembered saying it. And then their mother asked the question neither of them had been ready for. "If you still believe that, what are you going to do about it?" The room went silent. Your soulmate picked up the photograph. They looked at your face for a long moment. Then they reached for their phone. Their mother watched without saying anything. A name appeared on the screen. Your name. Their finger hovered over it. They had opened your contact before. They had typed messages before. But this time felt different. This time, they were no longer asking themselves whether they were allowed to miss you. They were asking whether they were finally ready to be honest. And just before they pressed the button, something unexpected appeared on their phone. A notification. Something connected to you. Something they never expected to see at that exact moment. Their face changed immediately. Their mother noticed. "What happened?" she asked. Your soulmate didn't answer. They simply stared at the screen. Because the notification contained a name, a message, and a few words that made them question everything they had believed about the past. And those words were connected to you. The forgotten photograph had already reopened one old chapter. But now, something from the present was about to reveal whether that chapter was truly finished, or whether both of you had been misunderstanding the silence all along.